The string quartet on the far end of the ballroom stopped mid-measure. Not because the conductor had signaled them, not because anything had gone wrong with the music. They stopped because Caelan Strom had leaned slightly forward in his chair and said 4 words so quietly that only the woman beside him and the man standing over her could possibly have heard them. 4 words, no raised voice, no hand gesture, nothing that the 300 guests in the room would have even registered as unusual. And yet every single person within 20 feet of table 9 felt it, that sudden drop in the air, that primal alertness, the way the nervous system recognizes danger before the conscious mind does. The man standing over the woman had grabbed her wrist. He hadn't let go yet. He had no idea what he had just done. The Langham Chicago's grand ballroom had been transformed for the Children's Medical Center Winter Gala into something out of a fever dream of excess and generosity. 12-foot Douglas firs wrapped in white lights stood in each corner. The ceiling dripped with crystal chandeliers, throwing honeyed light across 200 round tables dressed in cream linen and winter white florals. A string quartet in formal black occupied a low stage near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Outside, the Chicago night was a hard -8, the kind of cold that turned the city's glittering skyline brittle. Inside, old money and new money mingled over Beelcart salmon rosé and Wagyu sliders, writing 7-figure checks for pediatric oncology research. Gemma Sutton did not belong here. She knew it the moment she arrived, smoothing the skirt of the deep burgundy gown her colleague had insisted she borrow. Gemma was a pediatric critical care nurse at Northwestern Memorial. She worked 12-hour shifts in rooms where the stakes were always a child's life, and the coffee was always terrible. The world of crystal chandeliers and handwritten check amounts containing more zeros than her annual salary was not her world. She had been brought tonight as Caelan's guest, and she was still, after 6 months, working out exactly what that meant. Caelan Strom sat beside her at table 9, closest to the wide windows. To the glossy society pages that periodically featured his name, he was the founder of Strom Meridian, a private equity firm with a portfolio spanning Chicago, Houston, and Amsterdam. A reclusive man who attended exactly the events he chose to attend and declined everything else without explanation. 40 years old, unmarried, measured in a way that unnerved most people who met him. Not cold exactly, but precise, as if he never moved a muscle that hadn't been decided upon in advance. He had first appeared on the pediatric floor 3 months before they met. His sister's 7-year-old son, Jasper, had been admitted with a rare autoimmune reaction that had the entire attending team running consults. Caelan had come every evening during visiting hours, sat in the chair beside the bed, and read to Jasper from a paperback copy of Treasure Island he carried in his coat pocket. Gemma had been Jasper's primary nurse. She had seen men like Caelan before, men with money and power who expected the medical world to rearrange itself around their schedule, who spoke to nurses as though they were furniture. Caelan had thanked her by name at the end of every shift. He had learned the names of every person on Jasper's care team. On the night Jasper's fever finally broke, Gemma had come out of the room and found Caelan standing in the corridor, with his forehead resting against the wall, shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly. She'd put her hand on his arm, a nurse's instinct, nothing more, and he had turned and looked at her with an expression she had never quite been able to shake. He'd asked her to dinner 6 weeks later. She'd said yes 3 times before she believed he was serious. Sitting beside him now at the gala, Gemma felt the slight warmth of his hand resting near hers on the table, and thought, not for the first time, that she still didn't entirely know who he was. She knew the version of him who appeared at her apartment door, with groceries from the Italian market on Orlean Street, who had learned she took her coffee with exactly 1 spoon of dark honey. She knew he had a scar along his left collarbone he'd never explained, that he spoke 4 languages, and slipped into Italian when he was tired, that the calm he wore like a second suit was not indifference, but something more like controlled depth. The way the surface of a lake in November looks still while everything underneath keeps moving. What she knew about the other version of him existed only in the periphery, in the way his driver positioned the car before Caelan ever asked, in the way rooms shifted when he entered them, other men repositioning themselves with the unconscious instinct of smaller fish adjusting to a current. In the names she sometimes heard on phone calls he stepped away to take, names she didn't ask about, because some part of her understood that the answer was something she would have to decide whether she could hold. She had not yet been given cause to decide. She reached for her champagne flute. Caelan was saying something about the river view, the way the ice along the bank looked different at night. She was watching his mouth, half listening, happy in the way she was always a little surprised to be happy now when she heard the voice. "Well, didn't expect to see you here, Gemma." She went perfectly still. Brett Hollister was 34 years old. He had the kind of face that read as trustworthy in the first 5 seconds. Square jaw, practiced smile, eyes that knew exactly what they were doing. He was the co-founder of a healthcare startup called Clarity RX that had recently landed a sponsorship deal with the pharmaceutical company, whose name was printed on tonight's Gala program. He wore a charcoal suit that was slightly too shiny under the ballroom light. He was holding a glass of scotch, and even from 6 feet away it was not his first. For 2 years, Brett had been the axis around which Gemma's life had turned. She had believed him when he said the startup needed her to co-sign on a business account. Just procedural, he'd said, just easier with a second name. She had believed him when he said her NPI number needed to be listed on some billing paperwork. As a consulting provider, he was charming and specific and always had an answer ready before she finished the question. It was only after he'd vanished, 2 weeks after she'd found the bank statements she hadn't known existed, that she understood the shape of what he'd built. Her NPI number had been used to bill $412,000 in fraudulent insurance claims through Clarity RX's system. Her name was on the account. The liability on paper was hers. The past 14 months had been a quiet, exhausting terror. A healthcare attorney who'd told her it could take years to untangle. A letter from the Department of Health and Human Services that she'd read 4 times before she could breathe normally. She had not told Caelan the full shape of it. She'd told him only that her ex had left her with financial problems she was still sorting through. He had listened. He had not pressed. Brett stepped closer to the table now, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "You look," he started, and something shifted in his expression when he took in the dress, the table, the crystal, the whole expensive composition of the evening. It wasn't admiration. It was the flinch of a man who had expected to find some small and found them standing taller than he'd left them. "You've done well for yourself." "Brett," her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Please don't do this." "Don't do what?" He stepped to the edge of the table. His eyes skipped over Caelan with the particular dismissal of a man who had already categorized and discarded him. "Just another date, irrelevant. I just want to talk. We never got to really talk. We don't have anything to talk about." "I think we do." His voice dropped, a familiar drop she remembered, the one that came before the version of him that was harder to look at. "There's a matter of some business documentation that has my lawyers a little concerned. I think you know what I'm referring to." The threat was clear enough. He was going to suggest she'd been complicit. He had done it before, in a voicemail she'd saved, in a text she had screenshot 17 times to make sure she had it. Brett. He reached out and closed his hand around her wrist. It was not a gentle grip. His fingers locked tight above her pulse point, yanking slightly, and she pulled back on instinct, her chair scraping, her champagne flute tilting on the linen. The sound of crystal hitting the tablecloth was small and sharp. At that exact moment, Caelan Strom set down his own champagne flute. He didn't slam it. He set it down with the same deliberate care with which he did everything, a precise, unhud placement onto the white linen. The sound it made was almost nothing, a small, clean click, and yet the quartet stopped playing. Gemma would think about that later. The musicians couldn't have heard it, couldn't have seen what happened, and yet something in the frequency of the room changed the instant Caelan moved, and every set of hands stilled. He didn't stand immediately. He looked at Brett first, a long, unhurried look, the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved and is simply confirming the math. Then he stood. At 6'2", Caelan was not the largest man in the room, but the way he rose, slowly, with the contained patience of something that has decided, made the air around him feel different. He adjusted the single button of his suit jacket. He stepped around the table. He placed himself between Gemma and Brett. "Take your hand off her," Caelan said. That was all. 4 words, no flourish, delivered in the same quiet register he used to order coffee. But somewhere behind Gemma, she heard the subtle shift of weight, the sound of 2 men adjusting their position, and she caught from the corner of her eye the way a woman at the adjacent table reached for her husband's arm without looking away from her plate. Brett laughed. It was the laugh of a man who hadn't yet registered what was in front of him. "Who are you supposed to be?" "Brett," Caelan's voice was almost gentle. "I won't ask again." Something in the register, not louder but deeper, more final, reached through Brett's scotch and his bravado. His grip on Gemma's wrist loosened by a fraction. "This is a private conversation," Brett said, though the confidence in it had developed a hairline fracture. "Between me and my ex." Caelan looked at him for another moment. Then he said very quietly, "You operate Clarity RX, a healthcare startup registered in Delaware. As of this fiscal quarter, your company carries $4.1 million in outstanding debt to 2 institutional lenders and has failed 3 consecutive audits with your pharmacy benefit manager." Brett's smile went rigid. "In the past 18 months, Caelan continued, his voice never rising, his expression entirely unchanged, your company submitted 847 fraudulent insurance claims to Blue Cross and Aetna using a licensed provider's NPI number. The provider's name is Gemma Sutton." He paused. "The woman whose wrist you are currently holding." The color left Brett's face in a single visible drain. "How?" He stopped, started again. "How do you know that?" Caelan didn't answer. He reached out, his hand closing around Brett's wrist. Not hard, but with a grip that made perfectly clear it was not a request. And Brett's fingers released Gemma's arm as though the connection had been cut at the source. Caelan stepped back, positioning himself beside Gemma. He glanced at her wrist, at the faint red pressure mark Brett's grip had left, and something passed across his face. Not anger exactly, something quieter and more permanent than anger. "Mr. Hollister." Caelan's voice had dropped to the register that existed just below the ambient noise of the room. "You and I are going to walk to the coat corridor. Quietly. We are not going to disrupt this event." Brett looked around the room, at the guests who were carefully not looking at him, at the 2 men in dark suits who had materialized near the edge of their section, at the maître who had appeared from nowhere and was standing very still 12 feet away. "I just wanted to talk to her," Brett said, and he almost sounded like he believed it. "I know what you wanted," Caelan said. "Walk with me." The coat corridor ran along the east side of the ballroom, a narrow passage lined with numbered mahogany panels where guests checked their coats. At this hour, mid-gala, it was empty. The only sound was the muffled pulse of the string quartet resuming on the other side of the wall, and the ventilation system moving warm air through the space. Caelan's 2 men stopped at the entrance of the corridor. They didn't follow. They didn't need to. Caelan walked Brett to the far end, past the last coat panel to a small storage alcove, a practical, windowless corner that smelled of cedar and dry cleaning plastic. Brett pressed himself against the back wall. Whatever alcohol had been animating him 40 minutes ago had gone completely. His face was pale and shining with sweat. "Mr. Strom," Brett held up both hands slightly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, whatever she told you." "She didn't tell me anything," Caelan said. "That is not how I came to know these things." Brett blinked. "When I began spending time with Gemma Sutton," Caelan said, "I made it my practice to understand the full context of her life, including the people in it who had caused her harm." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He held it out. Brett's hands shook as he took it. It was a printout, a claim submission log, hundreds of line items, dates, amounts, NPI numbers, Brett's company name in the header, Gemma's NPI number repeated down the left column like a signature she had never written. Those claims were submitted between March of last year and this past October, Caelan said. The total fraudulent billing amount across Blue Cross, Aetna, and United comes to $412,000. The originating provider on each claim is Gemma Sutton. The beneficiary of each payment, routed through 3 shell accounts, is a holding entity you control. Brett's mouth moved without sound. The Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General received an anonymous referral this afternoon. Caelan continued, his tone unchanged. He might have been discussing a quarterly earnings report. The referral included claim logs, payment routing records, and the original authorization signatures. Yours, from the shell accounts. It also included a corrected provider declaration, signed and notarized, removing Gemma Sutton from any association with Clarity RX or its billing operations. He paused. That correction was processed last week. Her name is already clear. Brett stared at the document. He turned it over as if there might be something different on the back. There wasn't. The FBI's healthcare fraud unit typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to open a formal investigation following an OIG referral, Caelan said. You have at most that window to arrange legal counsel. I would suggest you use it. You, Brett's voice cracked. You can't just... I also purchased your outstanding institutional debt 3 weeks ago through a holding company. The debt is now callable. I will be calling it. Caelan adjusted his cuff. Not because of the debt. The debt is irrelevant. I am calling it because you put her name on federal documents to shield yourself, and you had planned to let her absorb the consequence when the system caught up with you. Brett's knees buckled visibly. He put one hand flat on the wall. You were going to let her lose her nursing license, Caelan said. Her career, the one thing she has built entirely on her own with no help from anyone, least of all you. For the first time, something moved through his voice, not heat, but weight, a low density that made the words land differently than anything that had come before. You will plead guilty to every charge they bring, Mr. Hollister. You will not attempt to reintroduce her name. You will not contact her. You will remove yourself from this city. He stepped forward, close enough that the space between them ceased to be negotiable. If you do not, I will not send lawyers. The men waiting at the end of this hallway are not lawyers. Tears cut through the sweat on Brett's face, quiet and involuntary. He didn't seem to know they were happening. I'll cooperate, he said. I'll tell them everything. I'll stay away from her. I swear to God. Caelan looked at him for 5 long, even seconds, ensuring the understanding was complete and permanent. I know you will, he said. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom without a backward glance. At table 9, Gemma sat with both hands folded around her champagne flute, the glass cold and solid and real. The Gala had smoothed itself back over the disturbance the way water closes over a stone. The maître had appeared with an apology and a fresh pour of rosé. The guests at neighboring tables had returned to their conversations. It was as if Brett Hollister had simply ceased to exist, as cleanly as a name erased from a document. She looked down at her wrist. The redness had already begun to fade. She heard the ballroom door and felt, before she saw, the shift in the room that told her Caelan had returned. She had stopped finding that particular phenomenon strange. She had started quietly to find it reassuring. He crossed back to the table and sat beside her rather than across from her. He reached over and took her left hand, the one Brett had grabbed, and turned it palm up. He looked at the faint marks for a moment. Then he lifted it and pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist, a quiet and deliberate thing, unhurried. She felt it all the way to the back of her sternum. Are you hurt? He asked. No. She Caelan, what did you do? He held her gaze, and she recognized the look, the careful calculation of a man deciding not how much to withhold, but how much truth she was ready to carry tonight. "The fraudulent billing claims submitted using your NPI number," he said. "You know about them." The bottom dropped out of her stomach. "You knew?" "For 11 weeks. How?" "Because when I understood that I was going to spend significant time with you," he said, with a simplicity that was almost devastating, "I needed to know everything that could hurt you, so that I could remove it." He held her hand between both of his. "The corrected provider declaration has already been filed. Your name has been removed from every associated document. The OIG referral was submitted today, under his name, with his authorization records attached. He cannot implicate you. There is no paper trail left that connects you to anything he did." Gemma pressed the fingers of her free hand to her mouth. She had spent 14 months sleeping badly, had kept the HHS letter in a folder she moved from drawer to drawer, as if changing its location might change its meaning. She had watched colleagues talk about 5-year plans and new certifications, and had smiled and said the right things, and privately believed that at any moment, the ground under her career could open. "He was going to let me take the fall," she said. "Yes." "He was going to let me lose my license." "Yes." There was something in Caelan's voice when he said it. Not rage, but the tone of a verdict already handed down and executed, requiring no further performance. "He is not in a position to do anything to you, not now, not after." Gemma looked at the river beyond the windows, the city lights scattered across the water, broken and bright. She thought about the folder in her bottom drawer, moved 11 times. She thought about standing in the supply room at work last March, and letting herself cry for 60 seconds because she had nowhere else to do it. The tears that came now were different, not fear, something structural releasing. A long-held tension in the load-bearing part of herself finally given permission to go. She leaned into Caelan's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He put his arm around her and let her lean, his hand steady at her back, and the string quartet played something slow and unhurried across the room. "Thank you," she said finally. "Don't." His voice was quiet against the top of her head. "Don't thank me for this." "Then what do I say?" He was still for a moment. "Nothing. You don't have to say anything." She looked up at him. He was watching the river, his profile even, and still in the chandelier light, and she thought about Jasper's room on the pediatric floor. About a man who'd carried a paperback in his coat pocket and had pressed his forehead to a hospital corridor wall because he loved his nephew and didn't have anywhere else to put it. She thought about the careful, deliberate way he'd worked his way into her life, not with force, but with patience and precision, learning her coffee order and her hours and the name of the colleague who made her laugh the hardest. She thought about what she was choosing to know and what she was choosing not to ask. She had always known, on some level, that those were two different things. Tonight she understood that choosing one did not require abandoning the other. Some things could be held at once. "Caelan," she said. I'm not afraid of you." He turned his head to look at her. In his eyes, dark and careful, warmer in this moment than the public version of him ever allowed, she saw something open slightly, the way a door opens that hasn't been opened in a long time. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so deliberate and so gentle that it made the breath catch in her chest. "I know," he said. They left 40 minutes later, before the formal program ended. A black Cadillac Escalade waited at the Michigan Avenue entrance, the exhaust making small white ghosts in the freezing air. One of Caelan's men held the rear door and stepped back as they approached. The city cold hit Gemma's bare arms for one sharp second before the warmth of the car sealed around her. The door closed. They were insulated from the Gala, from the winter, from everything outside the tinted glass. The Escalade pulled into traffic. Through the window, Chicago scrolled past, the Michigan Avenue canyon lit bright, the river glinting below Wacker, and beyond it the lake, which on a night this cold was just a vast, dark absence at the edge of everything. Gemma watched it all. She felt different than she had this morning, and she was still locating exactly how. Lighter was the easy word, but it wasn't quite right. It was more that she was finally standing on ground that wasn't going to move. Caelan sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, scrolling through something on his phone with the distracted efficiency he applied to everything that wasn't her. Then he put the phone away. "The pediatric floor does a holiday party," Gemma said. "Next week. The kids make ornaments and the attendings wear reindeer ears." "That sounds terrible," Caelan said. There was something quiet and almost warm at the corner of his mouth. "It's the best night of the year." She looked at him. "I want you to come." He turned to look at her. The city lights moved across his face in intervals, illuminating him in pieces the way streetlights do, partial and then whole and then partial again. "I'll be there," he said. She laced her fingers through his. Outside, the lake appeared briefly between buildings, enormous and dark and indifferent to everything happening at its edges, the way large things always are. But inside the car, with the heat running and the city gliding past and Caelan's hand steady around hers, something was entirely decided. Gemma Sutton had walked into that ballroom feeling like a visitor in a world that didn't quite belong to her. She left knowing that she had finally stopped being someone that things happened to. And somewhere on the north side of Chicago, in a very expensive hotel room, Brett Hollister was making his first phone call to a criminal defense attorney. He was going to need a very good one.